طيب أنا ممكن أسجل هنا كمان، بس هبقى يعني هيبقى عندكم على السيستم بردك مسجل يعني. طيب okay, I can start here with my iPhone until I see whether this يعني error happened because of my computer or because of the house internet. All right. You are now listening to me, I suppose. Please respond when I ask
أيوة يا
for.
دكتور.
طيب
ايه يا
اوكي.
دكتور؟
طيب احنا لازلنا في السؤال اللي هو يعني what is surplus value in Marxian analysis. طبعا يعني على الشاشة دلوقتي مش هتقدروا تشوفوا أي حاجة، لأنه أنا بستخدم الآيفون بتاعي، ما عنديش الفايلز محملة على الآيفون، فيعني معلش تراجعوها بقى عندكم في السلايدز يعني. إنما what is the surplus value in Marxian analysis? I said that what is the similarity or difference between rate of profit in the classical analysis and the rate of surplus value in Marxian analysis? Simply, you would say that the rate of profit in classical analysis would be obtained by relating the profit achieved by the total cost of production. Total cost of production includes wages given to the labor, plus the rent given to land, plus profit and interest given to the capitalists, the owner of the capitals, of the capital. But the rate of surplus value is different. It is obtained by dividing the surplus value, which is not really equal to the profit in the classical sense, divided by wages plus capital depreciation only. And in the missing explanation, because of the error which happened, in the missing explanation, I said that Karl Marx seems to have ignored land rent. He did not mention land rent. He did not mention interest. He only mentioned the capital depreciation among costs, which is the depreciation of capital, okay? And wages. So total costs are wages plus capital depreciation. This is a default in the Marxian analysis, that he did not give attention to the land and its cost. Notice that he could not talk about land as a factor stolen from the working class as he talked about capital. يعني لما اتكلم على انه الكابيتال ده stolen from the working class because the working class is the only productive human factor, okay? Then he could not say the same thing about land. Land is the creation of God. It's not the property of the working class or else, but it is the property. The philosophy of private property was discussed by earlier scholars. But Marx ignored the property of land and ignored the cost of land in calculating the cost of production. Okay, now we come to the next question. Explain how, according to Marx, the policies adopted by the capitalists in maximizing their profit and exploiting their workers would inevitably, يعني حتما, lead to capitalism destruction. Explain how, according to Marx, the policies adopted by capitalists in maximizing their profits and exploiting their workers would inevitably lead to capitalist destruction. Let us take the first part. What policies adopted by the capitalists in maximizing their profits? They tried all the time to keep wages at the minimum possible level. The minimum possible level means giving the worker only the subsistence wage level. And to all workers, we are giving subsistence wage levels. This is exactly as the classical economists said, except John Stuart Mill. Except John Stuart Mill. But all of them said that there is a wage fund which is assigned by the capitalists, and this wage fund would guarantee payment of the subsistence wage level to each worker. But how the capitalists would do more than this? They will try to keep wages at this minimum possible level. Remember that John Stuart Mill has said that the wage rate may rise above the subsistence wage level. Karl Marx lived almost in a very near time that near almost the same or the very similar time as John Stuart Mill in the late 19th century. He did not really witness all the time of John Stuart Mill, but he was living in the late 19th century, as you can see from his biography. Now, he was witnessing that the wage level may rise, but how to keep the wage level at subsistence level? This is done, that was done by employing capital intensive technology, by employing capital intensive technology. Capital intensive technology mean that workers will be replaced by capital. Workers will be replaced by capital. Because whenever we use more intensive technology in our machineries, means that the machinery firstly was employed or used by say 3 workers and now 2 workers, 1 worker. Okay, the more capital intensive technology means less workers are demanded. Now, when they employ in our time robots in factories, it means that big factories may work by very small number of labor. Okay? So capitalists in his time, as Marcus noticed, they were employing capital intensive technology in order to reduce the number of workers in their factories. And of course, more modern machineries would need less skilled labor. More modern machineries would need less skilled labor. This means that we don't have to pay higher wages to skilled labor. The modern machineries which we are using by technological progress allows the capitalists to keep the unskilled labor with their subsistence wages and also employ women and the children. Employ women and children, which they are taking less wages. Women were given less wage rate than men. Children were given much less wages than women or men. So by using the modern technology and this modern technology is capital intensive, they were able to keep wages at the lowest possible level while increasing their output. Now, these are the methods which they used to increase their profits, to maximize their profits. This is the first part. Explain how, according to Marx, the policies adopted by the capitalists in maximizing their profits and exploiting their workers would inevitably, hatman, would potentially, نهائيا, lead to capitalism destruction. How this would happen? Then you go to the slide which explain how the crisis would happen. More replacement of workers means what? Means more unemployment in the economy. But more serious than that workers constitute the bulk of consumers in the society. Constitute the bulk of the consumers in the society. Of course, there are capitalists who are consumers, but their numbers, they are much smaller in number than workers. The working class represent the bulk of consumers in the society. Thus, when there is unemployment and increasing unemployment, it means that the consumption will be less and less. This is why output is increasing more and more. Output is increasing because we are applying modern technology and trying to maximize our profit, but consumption is getting less in relative in relative sense. I mean, as a percentage, more unemployed workers means that the consumption rate is becoming less and less, which means what? It should mean that more commodities will be produced but would remain in stock. Profits, profits which are capital seeking are not realized because commodities are piling in stock, in stores, in their stores. This is a crisis. And it means that we cannot continue in production in the same rate. Our investment would be less. In fact, as Marcus said, the crisis would happen because over investment or under consumption, because under consumption means that commodities or output is piling in stock in our stores. It means that that our our total investment becomes over what is necessary. We cannot continue in investment to produce more. So the crisis happened because of underconsumption or overinvestment. This means the inevitable destruction of capitalism because a big crisis would happen. Next question, number 5. In Marxian analysis, capitalists play a historically vital role in technological progress. But in this way, they were unconsciously taking steps towards the end of their own system. The answer of this question is partly given in the previous question, in the previous answer. Because we said that capitalists, in order to maximize their profits, this in the previous answer, the capitalists, in order to maximize their profits, they are seeking continuous technological progress, capital intensive technology, which in fact is very important in historical progress. They are doing here, as he said, a historical part. They are playing a historical part in bringing about continuous technological progress. But in this way, as the question says, in this way they were unconsciously taking steps towards the end of their own system. Why? Because such a technological progress, as we have said in the previous answer, would lead to more and more unemployment. As Marcus expressed, the army of unemployed workers is going to increase more and more by time. The army of unemployed workers is going to increase year after another. This army of unemployed workers is the one which is going to make the revolution, the proletariat revolution. Remember this expression, proletariat means the poor working class, proletariat, and know how to spell it also and how to write it. This army of unemployed proletariat is going to carry the bloody revolution, which would destroy the whole system and end capitalism as a system. This is why Marcus said that capitalism is a stage in history, only a stage in history, and is going to end and to be replaced after that by scientific socialism. Taking the next question, what is scientific socialism? I've almost replied to that before the question comes. What is scientific socialism? Why Marcus thought that it is an inevitable stage that would follow capitalism. Before I repeat what I have said about scientific socialism, you have to know why he called it scientific. Because socialism in history had many varieties, starting with the socialism suggested by Plato in the ancient Greek time, which in fact is given in some details, such as preventing rulers from getting any private property and يعني asking people or suggesting that people should not take not only interest, they should not take usury or make profit. This is Plato, an ideal form of socialism, a utopian form. Some people later on called it communism, Plato's own version of communism. Socialism was also known as to be a cooperation, a good cooperation between the capitalists and the workers, like that cooperative socialism suggested by Robert Owen at one time when he was giving his workers, that was in the 19th century, where they treated workers as something يعني, lower than other people and should only take subsistence wage level. Robert Owen was giving his workers better wages and helping them in educating their children and giving them 1 day off in the week, a weekend. In the industrial time or the classical time, workers in factories worked 24 hours, sorry, worked almost 14 or 15 hours per day and 7 days. They did not have a weekend. Some of them, of course, were in better conditions, working only 10 hours a day, but 7 days in a week, something which changed after that, of course. But the socialism suggested by Robert Owen was a sort of human or fair socialism. But Robert Owen did not continue, by the way. He was an owner of a miller, and the other capitalists were not satisfied at all about him. And he ended by, I mean, closing his mill. The
دكتور معلش
yes,
معلش روبرت اوين مين معلش عشان انا تهت في الحته دي.
روبرت اوين كان واحد من رجال الصناعة، كان يملك طاحونة، وكان عنده عدد من العمال، وكان بيعاملهم معاملة طيبة في انه بيحاول يعلم اولادهم ويهتم بصحتهم، ويحاول بيديهم كمان في احيان مكافآت عن عملهم ازاي. رجال الاعمال الاخرين اللي هم الكابيتاليست other capitalists fought him، حاربوه، وحياته انتهت في الحقيقة بإفلاس في الطاحونة اللي هو كان يملكها. ده كان نوع من الاشتراكية اللي هو بيسمى الاشتراكية التعاونية. You can read about him in the internet. I'm not.
اللي هي الساينتفك سوشياليزم صح يا دكتور؟
نعم.
يعني هو كان ساينتفك سوشياليست صح؟
يعني كان من هذا النوع. انما
تمام.
انما في انواع اخرى من الاشتراكية برضه. يعني في انواع اخرى من الاشتراكية كتيرة، الوقت في الحقيقة مش هيتسع ان انا اكلمكم عنها. يعني في فابيان سوشياليزم، وفي سوشياليزم نشأت بعد في اوروبا بعد الفكر بتاع جون ستيوارت ميل، اللي هو بيطالب فيه بمعاملة العمال بطريقة افضل. The scientific socialism is different. That Karl Marx said that it is a historical stage, and the historical stage which must happen. ناخد بالنا من must happen, must occur. يعني as feudalism ended at one time, mercantilism started, which he called يعني الرأسمالية التجارية commercial capitalism ended also, and industrial capitalism اللي هي الكلاسيكال economists witnessed في مراحل. The same thing would apply to capitalism, which is industrial capitalism, which happened in the industrial era. We only call it capitalism briefly. This would end at one time because of the continuous technological progress, which is replacing workers by machineries, and then an army of unemployed is compiling, is increasing, and then they are going to revolt against the whole system and turn it into another system, which is scientific socialism. So scientific socialism, called the scientific because it, in his opinion, in Marx's opinion, a stage of history which is inevitable, inevitably following capitalism. Capitalism, as he said, is self-destructive. يعني ذاتية التدمير. Why self-destructive? Because when capitalists try to maximize their profit and progress technologically and increase their wealth, they are destroying themselves. This is why he called it self-destructive, and would lead potentially to a new stage. This stage is based on scientific analysis, and therefore it is scientific socialism. Okay? Now, this is scientific socialism and its meaning. Why Marx thought that it is an inevitable stage that would follow capitalism? I explained that. Number 7, the classical economists showed pessimism with respect to the future of economic growth. Yet they never expected that slow economic growth or stagnation would cause destruction of economic system as Marx analyzed. Discuss why. Because the classical economists simply and briefly believed that the system is going to be subject to a kind of depression. Economic growth is going to slow down. Remember the curve, which we explained in Ricardo's model of economic growth. We have explained that in the John Stuart Mill's model of economic growth. We have represented the curve of Ricardo, the first curve, which is affected by diminishing returns. Of course, diminishing returns is going to cause the total output to rise at decreasing rate, and then it's going to fall down after that. John Stuart Mill explained that this curve is going to shift upward and upward again and again. But this is John Stuart Mill. Don't mix John Stuart Mill's thought by the classical thought in this point. So when we say that the classical economists showed pessimism with respect to the future of economic growth, you say all of them with exception of John Stuart Mill. They thought that the system is going to show slow in the rate of economic growth because fixed land technology, which constant technology in agricultural activities, these are going to cause the total output to grow at decreasing rate. David Ricardo thought that this may be changed if we technologically advance it, but he did not explore that fully as John Stuart Mill did. John Stuart Mill, in fact, proved by his analysis that the shift is going on. So when we get such a question, the classical economists showed pessimism with respect to the future of economic growth. You say all of them, with except of John Stuart Mill. And they thought of stagnation. This is the level when the total output reaches a maximum and starts to fall down. It may not fall down in practice. When it does not fall down, but keeps at constant level, this we call stagnation. But Karl Marx said that no, it's not only stagnation or a case of depression. It is the destruction of the economic system itself, because the factors which are causing the increase in unemployment continuously, and therefore causing a decrease in the consumption level at the level of the economy. The next question, discuss why most of the classical economists expected economic stagnation and showed pessimism with respect to the future of capitalism, while Marx, who lived in the same period, expected the destruction of capitalism. This is, we answer in the previous question, but you have to add, we have to add to answer here. If we are trying to give a full answer or good answer, we have to add that it is because of difference in ideology between the two schools. The main difference, in fact, between Marx and the classical economists happened because of difference in ideology. The classical economists, including John Stuart Mill, were defending the capitalist system and believing that it is the right system. But Marx was working against that. Marx believed that this capitalist system is including contradictions, the class struggle. And he asserted this class struggle not only in capitalism, But also before that, in feudalism and in mercantilism, there are also two classes in the society: a class which is exploited, and the other which is exploiting them. A class which is exploited, يعني مستغلة, and a class which are exploiters, مستغلين. And this caused class struggle, not only in capitalism, but before that in feudalism, and it would cause the destruction in the system. And he explained how capitalism is self-destructive. So the difference in ideology, why Marcus thought that scientific socialism is an inevitable stage that would follow capitalism, we explained that. Question number 9, why Marxian expectation towards an inevitable end of capitalism in England and Germany had failed. Let us stop at this point. Marcus expected that, of course, according to the same meaning which I've mentioned and repeated, that capitalism is self-destructive. Okay? So, how to be self-destructive? He said that when the capitalist system reaches the maximum, the top, it would collapse. It would be destroyed by self powers inside it, by the working class, the proletariat. So capitalism cannot be destroyed before it reaches the pinnacle, the maximum, the top. Why? Because the self-destruction factors which are inside capitalism works over time. The system has to develop technologically to reach the maximum before the army of the unemployed proletariat becomes also at maximum. This army of the unemployed proletariat is the one which is going to revolt. And he called it a bloody revolution, Thawra Damawiyya. That's his opinion, that these workers would revolt and seize the factors of production, all factors of production, and nationalize everything. Everything would be public sector before it was a private sector in the hands of the capital. It would turn now by the power of the proletariat under scientific socialism to be public sector. Everything is going to be nationalized. Karl Marx and his sincere friend Friedrich Engels had issued a manifesto in 1848, which is called the Communist Manifesto, and said how the revolution would happen, how nationalization would happen, and they expected that this would happen firstly in England and Germany. Why England and Germany? Because they were the most advanced capitalist countries. The most advanced capitalist countries. England first, and then followed by Germany and France after that. Because of that, he predicted that capitalism would collapse, break down in England first and in Germany and probably France, but he never mentioned Russia. He never mentioned Russia. So the question says, why Marxian expectation towards an inevitable end of capitalism in England and Germany had failed? This is the question. Why it failed? Because in fact, you have to go to John Stuart Mill and his thought. which explained why the crisis which Karl Marx expected did not happen. Firstly, technology, modern technology came to be used in agriculture as it was used in industry. So modern technology was introduced in agriculture, and farmers now were using machineries. That was almost in the 1870s, okay, which we know in economic history as the agricultural revolution. Then one of the conditions of diminishing returns had vanished, had ended. The curve of output, which is rising at a decreasing rate and then stagnating, this curve is not there anymore. As John Stuart Mill said, why? Because it's shifting upwards. Shifting, one of the reasons is the agricultural revolution by the introduction of modern technology in agricultural activities. This is one reason. Second reason, that the revolution in sea transportation, because of the development of sea transportation, particularly after 1869, after the opening of the Suez Canal. The opening of the Suez Canal shortened the route from Europe to East Asia, to India and the other countries there, shortened it so that the distance, which was taking 3 months by the sailing vessels, السفن الشراعية الضخمة, was taking 3 months to go from London to Bombay and come back in 3 months. And when they developed these sailing ships and provided them with propellers, يعني machines تساعدهم في انهم يمشوا شوية, the time was shortened to 1 month and a half. But when the Suez Canal was opened and the steamships were used, the journey from London to Bombay was taking 3 weeks to go and 3 weeks to come back. And later on became 2 weeks to go and 2 weeks to come back. And then later on, refrigerators were used in these steamships. Trade, international trade was opened. And not only that, colonialism depended on the improvement in sea transportation to go quickly, fastly to countries like India and occupy them. Now, when a mutiny happened in India, it is, you can go to suppress such a mutiny in just send an army. It would reach them after 2 weeks. Before that, it would reach them after 3 months. You see the difference? And the invention of the railways helped the colonial activities more and more. Colonial powers depended on improvement on transportation. Trains inside the colonies and sea transportation carrying the soldiers to such colonies. More than that, I'm explaining in detail to this point, but when you get the question, explain it just briefly. Just say sea transportation revolution, agricultural revolution, and so on. But I'm explaining in detail just to give you knowledge, which may not have been mentioned in the recorded voice lecture. But anyway, the colonial activities also was one of the main reasons of getting rid of what? The unemployed workers. The unemployed proletariats who were supposed to carry a revolution against capitalists were able now to go to the colonies and became masters there. أصبحوا سادة هناك. Instead of being almost like slaves in their countries, they became masters. They got good jobs. They became also capitalists in some cases. They found opportunities to work in India, in Australia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in the mainland of China after that. The colonial rule, colonialism, solved the problem of the unemployed workers in England, in Germany, in France. While international trade, when was opened, got rid of what? The stock, the piling the stock of consumption goods, which Marx thought that under consumption would destroy the capitalist system. Now the extra commodities which were produced in England or in Germany or in other industrial country were exported to these countries, while exporting from these colonies raw materials and food and so on. That's historical reasons. This is why capitalism did not collapse in England or in Germany. Powers of technology in the agriculture sector, big growth of international trade after the revolution in maritime transportation, okay, and the change which John Stuart Mill had explained in the behavior of the working class. They were not anymore just workers for 10 or 14 hours in factories. They were working less time because of technological advance also, taking one day in the week off, weekend, teaching their children. Their children probably became in a different class. After education, children of the working class became in the middle class, unwilling to revolt, like their poor working class fathers. Okay, these are all reasons why the inevitable revolution, which Marx predicted, had not happened in England or Germany. How far the Bolshevik revolution depended on Marx's theory. In fact, the revolution happened in Russia in 1970 on lines of Marxian philosophy, on lines of Marxian philosophy, because there was there the Bolshevik party in Russia, a group of young revolutionary communists or Marxists. And in fact, Russia would not at all, in the situation which Marx explained, it had not reached at all the pinnacle or the maximum of capitalism. Industry in Russia by that time was still underdeveloped. Only some factories there. But you cannot say that that industrial progress reached maximum there. Nothing like that. Only there was a socialist party on the Marxian lines led by Lenin. Lenin is a follower of Marx in his thought. And in fact, the Bolshevik party exploited the conditions of the First World War to antagonize the soldiers and convince them, the Russian soldiers who shared in the First World War and were tired of the war. The First World War was really a long war by traditional weapons. And all soldiers from all countries were getting bored of such a long war, which took millions of people, killed millions of people. He estimated about 5 or 6 million souls died in that war. And the Russian soldiers were also tired of such war. And the Bolshevik convinced them to go back to their countries and revolt against the Caesar. يعملوا ثورة ضد القيصر هناك ويقتلوه ويحلوا النظام الجديد اللي هو النظام الماركسي بدلا من النظام التقليدي. These events which happened in Russia were not at all in Marxian theory. Later on, in the 1929, 1933, there was a big depression in Europe, as you know, all you know that from the study of economics, the big depression of 1929, 1933, and the Marxist economists expected that that was the end of capitalism. But again, it was not the end of capitalism. Probably it was an end of the capitalist system which was known in Europe in the 19th century and until the First World War. But the beginning of new era of capitalism. الرأسمالية نظام قدر يغير لونه مع الأحداث زي الزواحف اللي هي اسمها الحرباء تغير لونها على حسب الشجر أو النبات اللي بتختفي فيه. Capitalism was able to change its colors. Now the working class in Europe, in Britain, in Germany, in France, in all Europe, did not make a revolution during the Depression, as Marx expected. But they were able to come into government, into authority, to form labor governments, and to nationalize يأمموا factories instead of killing the capitalists and taking everything over. They only nationalized the main heavy industry factories. That was all. In Britain, the railways was nationalized, iron and steel was nationalized, the transportation in general was nationalized, national health. So the working class were more peaceful, and they were satisfied by getting into authority and nationalizing the main business in the economy instead of destroying the capitalist system and nationalizing everything. Did the Marxists said anything about that? Yes, Lenin said that capitalism had not ended before, because capitalism is having another stage, which is colonialism or imperialism. Imperialism is another word used for capitalism, but to mean more about exploitation of other countries, imperialism. So Lenin said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, not the technological progress would cause or would make the highest stage of capitalism. It is imperialism. As long as imperialism is there, capitalism is going to continue. But because of imperialism, people who were colonized, people who were exploited in colonies, are going to revolt and going to get their freedom, while the colonial or imperial countries are going to fight each other. This happened, yes, in the Second World War, and the imperial countries were fighting against each other. But again, this did not finish capitalism as Lenin expected. Last question, why Marcus attacked Robert Malthus' theory of population? How his attack was different than that of John Stuart Mill? Yes, his attack was based also on ideological basis. That he said that Robert Malthus was of course supporting the capitalist class, and he did not want the working class to take their rights. His theory, in fact, was talking about the working class as if they were kind of rabbits or anything like that. This is what Karl Marx said. He did not treat the working class as humans and the only productive factor of production. So indirectly, Robert Malthus, in his opinion, was one of those serious scholars who defended the capitalists against the working class. The working class, if they take their rights, which is the surplus value, will be able to live nicely, comfortably, teach their children and do everything. But it is their property which was stolen from them, the capital, their property which was stolen from them. And the subsistence wages which they take is their problem. Not as Robert Malthus wrote, and that there is a race between the working class and the means of living. John Stuart Mill refused the Malthus theory, but because he said because food was rising above the number of population, not as Malthus expected, because of the agricultural revolution. Food was available by means of importation after international trade was expanding. The problem of the working class in John Stuart Mill ended because the working class behavior changed and so on, the things which we have said. These, in fact, are the questions which I wanted to answer about Marcus. There are some notes which I had given to students before in the previous year about these points, which you may like to look over them if you would like to see further knowledge. If you need that, just give me a hint in your chat. The time still allows us, of course, to give more, which I'm ready to give more, but now it is almost 7 minutes to 2. We started at 12. We still have time. But let us take a rest for يعني about 20 minutes, which means that we are coming back, say, at 2:10, 10 minutes past 2, or 15 minutes after 2. Let it be 2:15, and we can stay together then for 45 minutes more in order to complete our lecture. So we say now goodbye, and we are going to stop the lecture, leave at this point, okay? And back again at 2:15 when we'll deal with some questions about Ibn Khaldun. Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.